Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Peter Jones.
Thank you, Steve. It's always very hard to follow you. Thanks so much on behalf of everyone for your presidentship. You're my all-time favorite president in the US. No offense, Sarp, but anyway, that okay? Come through for everyone? I'm going to assume yes. Please start signaling frantically if that's not the case. Anyway, welcome to LUG. And that's interesting, actually, hearing the intro there from Florida, that 2006 was when University of Florida started using Lustre. And that was also when I first joined the Lustre team myself. So it's coming up 2 weeks' time, I think will be, maybe even less now, will be 15 years for me. So today I'm going to be focusing on the community releases and the work we do with the OpenSFS Lustre Working Group. So I'm co-lead of that with Dustin from Oak Ridge. We've had this forum for over a decade now, just to serve as a forum where we collaborate for activities around anything to do with the Lustre community releases. So this is OpenSFS does coordinate this and promote this, but it is open to anyone, regardless of whether you're a member of an organization that is a supporter of OpenSFS. You don't have to, basically you just need to have an interest to participate, whether that interest is just to lurk on the mailing list and just keep abreast of what's going on, or to get more actively involved with sort of testing and development on the releases themselves. So one of the things that we do in the forum is we come up with the questions for the annual OpenSFS survey. So I'm sure many of you are on the Lustre mailing list, so we'll have seen the sort of February, March every year, the emails going out, sort of encouraging you to participate in this survey. So we use these surveys, we deliberately keep the surveys fairly succinct, so it's only a few minutes to participate. There's no personal contact details collected, so you're not at any risk of getting inundated with spam if you do participate. And we use, we use the data from those to do comparisons over years and sort of inform our decision making a bit on where we're going to put prioritization around the releases. So this graphic here at the bottom here is the number of respondents over the years we've been doing the survey. So if you see the last 2 years have been on the lower end of the number of respondents. Obviously with the pandemic, lots of things are not quite operating as they normally do, and maybe people are less, able to focus on something like this with other distractions in their lives. But still the numbers are in the ballpark where we can still use them for comparison purposes when we look at overall percentages, even though I do hope that we see an upsurge in these participation going forward back to the higher levels we've seen previously. So going into the 2021 results a little, just to sort of sum up firstly some of the background type questions. So many of the respondents provided details about the production file systems they have and whether those were LDiskFS or ZFS. And we saw that, of the people completing the survey, many even had a mix of some ZFS and some LDiskFS, or, it's very common to have multiple file systems for a given respondent. Overall, totting up the total amount of storage, we see that, LDiskFS, which has been the longer running though, it's been well over a decade as well for ZFS, I think. But we still see, a good representation from ZFS, but LDiskFS still remains slightly the higher, higher number in terms of the amount of actual storage capacity. Looking at support, so this is asking people if they have formal support arrangements in place with a third-party organization for their Lustre usage. And so the blue here is for people who that is the case. The green is for people who offer such services. And then sort of slightly over half of people are just totally relying on their own internal expertise and perhaps, advice on the mailing lists. So this is one of the things that makes this survey particularly interesting because it does provide input across the whole spectrum of the Lustre community. Looking also of usage here. So this has been a question that we've had for a few years, and this was actually the first year where we didn't have a very significant other, where there was some clear, multiple people putting the same thing that we'd missed a category. So I think we finally identified the common categories across Lustre. As you can see, there's very diverse usage here. It's generally, people using this as a general purpose file system for all different kinds of use. I think even in the categories where there are lower lower percentages of the respondents, I think that's, there probably is higher overall usage in those segments. It's probably more of an indication that in those segments, say like media entertainment, there people in that field are perhaps, more likely to be engaging with a vendor and then not be on the mailing lists to see the prompts to complete the survey. But, always interesting to see, strong representation in the sort of areas we've traditionally had, been aware of lots of usage, and also AI and machine learning over the last few years has been a very big growth area. As people can select multiple categories here, it's very well likely that they have selects, I think many areas are looking into AI machine learning in different contexts. So moving on here. So as to the actual versions of Lustre people using in production. So here I'm stacking this up to see the last, the 2019 through 2021 data, blue, red, green, respectively. And you can see the pattern that we've seen for some years now, since we've had LTS releases, is that generally older releases gradually decline over the years in terms of the percentage of respondents still using those, as people either upgrade or take older systems out of service. And then the LTS releases are basically the releases people have been upgrading to, or where new installs have been happening, people are more commonly choosing those. So last year, when we were going over the survey results, at that time, 210 was slightly ahead of 212, and my not very bold prediction was this year's survey would see 212 overtake 210, and no surprise, I was shown to be correct with that prediction. So 212, mid 80% of respondents to have at least one production 212 file system. So, that leads me on here to the next topic is a very common interest, question, have events like this, where people are pausing and reflecting about the big picture. People are saying, well, what might be the right timing to look at our next switch? We switched 18 months or so ago from 210 to 212. As you see, people are, there's still, if I just switch back a bit, you can see there's still, fairly strong, about a third of people still have a reduction 210 file system. So it's still, widely used, but, clearly 212 is in ascendancy at the moment. So as there have been some initial suggestions at the LWG that we should, start thinking about this. So we decided to put a question into the survey this this year to sort of see what the level of interest was out in the community. So from the people who responded to this survey, there was very split opinions here. Just slightly over half thought that 214, which just came out, a few months ago, could be a suitable replacement. And then, again, just slightly under half had an option, which was basically to defer longer before making a switch. So that in itself, I was honestly a little surprised at the demand, that it was as high as that to move at all. But this does need a bit of more consideration here, as I'll elaborate here as we go on. So generally there's two main drivers that we've seen historically as we've gone through these, as people want to move to newer releases of Lustre. So the first of those is new features. So we definitely, Lustre has become a pretty mature file system. It's been around over 20 years now, and many people are pretty satisfied with the feature set, and they're not necessarily clamoring for the next versions to get the newer enhancements that are coming with the newer releases we put out. But we do have a question here about the features that have been in the recent releases, and we could see that there was sort of reasonable interest in features that are only in 2.13 or 2.14. So, for example, encryption or the persistent client cache, pull quotas. So that clearly would be a factor why people might like to have a newer LTS release, because they want to use those features, but they want to do so with a sort of confidence that they have some that they're getting updates and fixes as needed, and in particular, support for newer versions of related software in the ecosystem, like Linux distributions and MoFed versions. And then the other side, the other thing that's the driver to people wanting to move to new releases is generally newer kernel support. And that in itself might be driven by new hardware has requirements for a new kernel, and then that then means that you need to have a newer version of Lustre that works with that newer kernel. So, we've had a standard question for many years about what kernels people are using, and we had always traditionally lumped in together Red Hat and CentOS, and back in the day, Scientific Linux as well. Any Red Hat derivative, we've considered that all to be one category, as those being interchangeable. And so, as you can see here, and our practice has been for testing for the releases, that we'd focus on, for the servers, we would focus on one version of Red Hat or derivatives for the servers, and then do a lot more variety of testing on the clients. And so there's generally some other server options that can work, and there's people in the community who put some effort into keeping those up to date so they're usable. But as you can see here, certainly from the results of the survey, most people are sort of sticking with what's most widely tested and known to work well. And Red Hat or CentOS 7 is, over 90% of users in production are using those for their servers today. And given that both LTS releases, the last two LTS releases, 2.10 and 2.12, had Red Hat or CentOS 7 as servers, that's not a surprise. So moving on to the clients, as you can see, there's a lot more diversity here. Still, Red Hat or CentOS 7 is the most commonly used option, but there are a lot more flavors of Ubuntu and SUSE being used here. So the big wrinkle in this area, as you're probably aware, is there have been some changes announced recently, tail end of last year, I think, around CentOS and future releases of CentOS. So CentOS is very commonly used in the Lustre community. And so we were sort of considering, well, if we, what should we be doing for the for future community releases of Lustre? We've always tested on Red Hat and CentOS, and what was going to happen with people's CentOS usage? Would they switch? Would people who use CentOS today switch to use Red Hat? Would they switch to use Ubuntu? Would some new CentOS type project spring up? So we sought to try and draw out, what people's thinking was, to try and get some clarity about how we should proceed. So we put this question together, and the thinking was we were trying to be a bit indirect to not lead the question, but with hindsight, it's pretty apparent this question was not well formed to get what we needed, because there's no indication here whether people are using clients or servers for these distros. So we don't know. We can see that there's a lot of people planning to use Ubuntu, but we don't know if that's with the current model still, that they're planning to use Ubuntu on the clients only with this newer version, or if they're planning to sort of switch and use the servers, because formerly they use CentOS and that's not going to be an option to use with newer kernels. So, and then the other thing that came out, as you see, the other category was filled with people basically saying, the new CentOS, and some people would say Rocky Linux, and some people would say Alma Linux. We even had a vote for Oracle Linux. Some people said anything but Rocky Linux. So it really was all over the place. So anyway, looking at that in terms of, so these things to me seem fairly closely tied. If we were going, at the point we do a future LTS shift, it's clear to me that we would need to switch to a much newer kernel. And certainly like the 2.14 release, which was, some people favored to move to, that was tested on a Red Hat 8.3 and CentOS 8.3 servers. But typically with the LTS releases, we've kept up with minor versions of Red Hat as they come out to add support in various, dot releases. But that doesn't seem like for people who are CentOS users today that would be a viable option. Now, maybe if we can get behind a new CentOS-like project, that could be, things could move along fairly similarly to they have before, but that needs a bit more clarity around that. So that's just to recap. So yes, people are interested in some of those newer features. But we do need to get some clarity, independently of whether the timing is right to move LTS branches. We still need to know, what's going to be useful as we're working on 2.15. What's going to be the useful, distro for us to focus our testing on. So we did do a little test recently. Andres and I were involved in a seminar at the Rice University Oil and Gas show back in March, and I did a little mini survey on this topic then. And so I've done the, I've done the same here. I put a little mini survey together, which is just focusing on these issues. And I'm hoping that people participating today can provide their thinking. It would be good if this could be just one person per organization, if you can kind of determine who that is, so we can, get representational views of people, but just to provide a bit more, a bit finer drilling into those specific questions. And yes, so I will drop this into chat as soon as I conclude presenting here, so that people can, fill that in at their leisure. It should only take 2 minutes. It's nothing very complex, but just to sort of get a read as to what people are thinking so far with their distro usage and interest in LTS releases. So moving on into actual specifics here. So the 2.12.6 release went GA late last year. That had support for RHEL CentOS 7.9 servers and clients, and other more current updates on distros. And it seems like as of yesterday, Red Hat 8.4 went GA, so very likely that's, we'll get the wheels in motion to put out a 2.12.7 to provide support for that in the coming weeks. 2.14, that, as I said, that went GA in February. That had RHEL and CentOS 8.3 servers, and also was the first release to use ZFS 2.0, and who was also used MoFed 5.2 at the time, though I believe there's now a MoFed 5.3 out. New features here, there's encryption, the data encryption, and so Sébastien Boisson is going to be talking tomorrow, I believe, in a lot more detail about that. OST pull quotas was interesting as well. So yes, it's definitely a fairly interesting release. And our current release we're working on is 2.15, so we're targeting that for the end of the year. At the moment, we've still got the same distro support matrix as we have for 2.14, with the usual interop and upgrades from the latest LTS. Then we've already had the network selection policy, or it used to be referred to as UDSP. That's a multi-rail enhancement. So that's been talked about, I think, even several LUGs ago. That was talked about as a feature, but just with feature landing deadlines and such like, it hadn't quite got in, but it is now confirmed and landed for this release. Sébastien is doing the follow-on work as well in the encryption space to have the file names encrypted, and then also, so that will be covered tomorrow, and I believe James is talking next, James Simmons from Oak Ridge, about IPv6 support in the context of the Lustre kernel version of the Linux kernel version of the Lustre client. And here's the big picture of the roadmap, the latest graphical roadmap from lustre.org. So this just shows the timings and the big pictures of releases. And Andreas Dilger will be talking tomorrow in a lot more detail about some of the sort of other activities that go on. We tend to, on this roadmap, just focus on the timings and sort of maybe the marquee type features, but yeah, there's a lot more interesting work, development work that's been going on to talk about. So just to recap, so 2.12.7 will be out in the near future. 2.15 is in early stages and should be out by the end of the year. There's some active discussions underway about the LTS branch, and so I'll drop the link here into chat shortly. And finally, just if anyone wants to get involved in the LWG, just the details are here on the wiki. Feel free to sign up for the mailing list or just turn up to a meeting. Or if you have any questions, just can drop Dustin or myself a note directly. Our contact details are on that wiki page. Okay, so I think that's everything I have today. I will, if people have questions now, I'm happy to take them. If people, I will also be sticking around for the social event later. So I'm happy to take, if people want to chat there, we can do that too.
A number of questions have been asked in chat.
Okay, can I just drop this? This is there you go. I just wanted to drop the survey link in.
Yes, sure. There have been a number of questions about DKMS.
Okay.
And there's been a number of answers also being provided within chat, so I don't know if we actually need to go through that. One question that did get asked was, are you going to be releasing 2.10.8 for RHEL 7.9?
No. Oh, no, we, with the LTS releases, we just focus on one at a time. And then when we have a transition period, we did a 6-month overlap where any sort of triggering event, we would do, both kinds of release, but after then we're just focusing on one set. That's, it's sort of focusing on scarce resources. So I believe, there's patches out there, and if, when people have made it work, and so it's possible, but it's not something that we're, there's a lot of overhead in doing those releases in terms of testing, etc. So that's, we just put our focus on the releases where people are going to use them most.
All right. Another question that's popped up is, can you run 2.14 on Red Hat 7.9?
Yeah, I see someone beat me to it. It's like, it's, yeah, I mean, there's often other distros will work. And as you can see, when you saw the data, there was people running, you know, Ubuntu servers as well. So often these will work, they'll build and run, and but that's just not, you know, we do very extensive testing on, you know, so basically it's quite possible it'll work, but it would obviously make, you know, just to be aware, if you are using something that's less thoroughly tested, you just need to expect to sort of, you know, proceed with caution, or to sort of account for more time yourself to run tests to just reassure yourselves that it works. I mean, we don't try and break things, but we're not, you know, accidentally some change for a newer kernel may, you know, invalidate some assumptions in the code for the older kernels. So.
All right. I have not seen any other questions. Oh, wait, what's the best way to get involved with the server testing?
Well, I mean, you can, I mean, it's probably a longer conversation. I'll just give a quick answer, but I'm happy to talk more detail to you, Christian. But basically, we do have, you know, all the code as we're doing the development is open, and our Jenkins builds are open. So either if you're building yourself from source or preferring to use binaries, there's options there. Usually, you know, periodically we'll do tagged builds that are ones that get more testing. And there's landings that happen, you know, maybe twice a week. We have batches of things land, like, you know, some things just landed overnight, for example. And then if you find issues, then you can obviously report them via Jira. If you want to get involved, you know, in terms of like, how can your testing be most valuable, then it's kind of probably better to be a bit more hooked into the LWG to sort of make sure that you're not duplicating testing with others, etc. Right? But yeah, so hopefully that's a good enough high-level answer, and happy to talk to you a bit more detail about specifics if you like.
All right. Thank you, Peter.